In the middle of New Mexico's sweltering desert lies a place few would think to fear. Elephant Butte Lake looks serene, an artificial reservoir that draws campers, boaters, and vacationers from nearby towns. But just beneath its surface, a far more sinister reality once unfolded, one that wouldn't come to light until a half-naked woman sprinted through the streets of a nearby trailer park with a padlock clamped around her neck and chains trailing behind her. That woman was Cynthia Vigil, and the man she escaped from was David Parker Ray, later branded by investigators and the media as the "toy box killer." What she endured, and what he confessed to, was so disturbing that seasoned agents needed therapy afterward. Yet despite the magnitude of his crimes, the full truth of what Ray did may never be known. Ray wasn't a drifter. He wasn't a recluse or a stranger to the community. He worked as a park ranger and mechanic, blending into Elephant Butte without suspicion. He had a daughter, friends, even romantic partners. He looked normal. That was the terrifying part. There were no red flags, no flashing signs, until one broke free. On March 22, 1999, Cynthia's escape triggered a frantic 911 call and a police response that quickly turned into a scene out of a horror movie. Investigators followed her desperate directions to a nondescript white trailer behind Ray's home. What they found inside defied reason. It was a fully outfitted torture chamber, rigged with chains, surgical tools, gags, whips, clamps, a homemade gynecological table, and a vast array of recording equipment. The walls were soundproofed. The ceiling was mounted with cameras. There was even a mirror on the ceiling so victims could watch their own degradation. And in the center of it all was a faded sign that read, "Satan's Den." Police also discovered a cassette tape. The audio recording was a monologue, Ray's own voice calmly describing to his victim what would happen over the next several days. He detailed procedures. He explained rules. He warned against resistance. The tape lasted over an hour, and he didn't once raise his voice. His tone was casual, even comforting, as he spoke about torturing, hypnotizing, and sexually abusing women in the most methodical way imaginable. Ray had a pattern, and it was deeply calculated. He allegedly used sedatives and paralytics, sometimes even experimental drugs, to disable his victims. Once unconscious, they would be chained and stripped, their senses dulled but not gone. Some remembered flashes, others remembered nothing at all until days later. To make matters worse, Ray claimed to use a truth serum to suppress memories, ensuring many victims couldn't testify even if they wanted to. It wasn't just what was done, it was how it was done. Ray documented everything. He filmed his captives, labeled the tapes, took notes, and organized them like trophies. In total, over 400 journals were recovered, many describing gruesome acts in stomach-turning detail. He recorded names, dates, and timelines. But there was one glaring issue: there were more entries than confirmed victims. As investigators combed through the trailer and its adjacent buildings, they found boxes of women's clothing, shoes, and jewelry. The items didn't belong to Cynthia or the other known survivors. They belonged to others, women who had never been reported found. One box contained IDs. Another held a blood-stained hairbrush. Yet there were no matching missing persons reports, and no physical bodies tied directly to Ray. That chilling discrepancy became the center of the investigation. Was David Parker Ray merely a sadist who liked to simulate death? Or was he something far worse, a serial killer who perfected the art of erasing evidence? Authorities arrested Cindy Hendy, Ray's girlfriend and accomplice, who had been present during Cynthia's captivity. It was Hendy who accidentally dropped the keys Cynthia used to escape. Under pressure, Hendy confessed, she had lured women for Ray. She had watched. She had participated. And yes, according to her, he had killed. But she didn't know, or wouldn't say, where the bodies were. Hendy's testimony opened the door to another victim, Kelly Garrett, a young woman who vanished after a fight with her husband in 1996. Ray's own daughter, Jessie, had allegedly helped drug Garrett and bring her to the trailer. Kelly was chained, tortured, and eventually released near her home with no memory of what had happened. She thought she'd blacked out or been wounded in an assault. She never connected the dots, until detectives showed her the video. Ray was arrested and charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, rape, and torture, but none of murder. Prosecutors lacked the physical evidence necessary to make homicide charges stick. And that was the ultimate frustration. The journal spoke of death, the videos showed women who vanished, but not a single body was ever found. The case gripped the nation. Journalists from across the country descended on the quiet town of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. News vans lined the dusty streets. Ray's face was plastered across headlines. People couldn't believe that a man who looked so average could be behind something so monstrous. And yet, the horror didn't end with his arrest. It was only the beginning. The longer the investigation went on, the clearer it became that the trailer was just one piece of the puzzle. Ray had hinted at other locations, burial sites in the desert, lakeside drop points, and even mines. But time and again, searches turned up nothing. What Ray left behind were questions. Endless, wounding questions. Who were the other women? How many were there? And where were they now? Because when you walked through the door of that trailer, you either escaped or you didn't. And the desert never gave anything back. When the investigation into David Parker Ray's crimes expanded beyond the borders of Elephant Butte, it quickly became clear that law enforcement was dealing with something unprecedented. Not just a sadist, not just a predator, but a man who had refined depravity into a system, one perfected over years, perhaps even decades. And even more disturbing was the possibility that he hadn't worked alone. Ray's girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, had already made headlines after her partial confession. She cooperated not out of remorse, but to save herself. Her statements were chillingly casual, like she was describing someone else's life. According to Hendy, she and Ray had kidnapped multiple women. The trailer was only one location. The nearby lake? Possibly another. A remote canyon site? Maybe. When detectives asked where the women were now, her answer was always the same: I don't know. Inside the interrogation room, Hendy painted a portrait of a man completely in control. Ray had been calm during abductions. Clinical during torture. Meticulous when cleaning up. His only concern was secrecy. Victims were selected with care, often vulnerable, marginalized women who wouldn't be missed right away. Hitchhikers, runaways, sex workers. People who could vanish without causing a ripple. One of those was Marie Parker, a young woman last seen at a 4th of July party in 1997. She had accepted a ride from Ray and was never seen again. Hendy admitted Marie had been taken to the trailer. She was held for days. There were recordings. But when it came to her final fate, Hendy claimed she had passed out from drugs and didn't witness what happened next. All she remembered was waking up and finding Marie gone. Investigators launched a large-scale search of Elephant Butte Lake, dragging the waters for signs of human remains. Divers swept through submerged coves. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Dozens of officers combed through remote areas Ray was known to frequent. But the desert refused to speak. No remains, no traces, no forensic confirmation. Only implication. And then came the journals. Inside Ray's trailer, police found boxes of detailed logs, handwritten notes that outlined each victim's ordeal. They were arranged by date, some cross-referenced with video labels. The entries were precise. Times, restraints used, body reactions, drugs administered. And occasionally, a word would appear that changed everything: no return. But still, the names didn't match known missing persons cases. And still, Ray said nothing. His silence was part of the strategy. Ray pleaded not guilty, forcing the state to move forward with a prosecution based only on the women who had survived. These included Cynthia Vigil, Kelly Garrett, and another woman who came forward under the name Angie Montano, all of whom described similar methods of abduction, torture, and eventual drug-induced release. Each woman's memory was fragmented, hallucinatory. Some had to be shown tapes of their captivity before they believed it had truly happened. The drugs Ray used, including sodium amytal and combinations of benzodiazepines, were designed to scramble reality, suppress memory, and paralyze victims without full sedation. The result was a psychological prison that extended long after the physical one ended. Prosecutors were confident that with 3 victims and volumes of evidence, conviction was inevitable. But the defense strategy threw a wrench into the case. They claimed that everything was consensual, that Ray was a BDSM enthusiast and that the women had willingly participated. It was a grotesque manipulation of truth, but it raised enough doubt to delay proceedings. And then, in a move that stunned everyone, Ray offered a plea deal. He would confess. He would take a life sentence. He would describe the women, the crimes, the process, on one condition: that his daughter, Jessie Ray, be released. Jessie had been arrested on suspicion of helping her father abduct Kelly Garrett, and Ray was desperate to shield her from prison. The state, eager to close the case, agreed. It was a decision that remains controversial to this day. True to his word, Ray began to talk. He confessed to abducting and torturing multiple women. He admitted to orchestrating their disappearances. He gave the location of at least one burial site, which authorities dug up, but found nothing. Either the information was outdated, or Ray was still playing games. Despite his confessions, he never gave investigators enough to locate a single body. And then, just days after entering his guilty plea, he collapsed in his holding cell. A massive heart attack took his life before he could serve a single day of his sentence. Just like that, the answers died with him. No final interview. No maps. No parting confessions. The court hadn't even formally sentenced him. He died in legal limbo, having revealed just enough to avoid trial, but not enough to bring closure to his victims. The frustration from law enforcement was palpable. Ray had manipulated the system to the very end. He had silenced his victims during life and managed to silence justice in death. The plea deal meant no murder conviction, no trial for Jesse, and, most agonizingly, no closure for the families who believed their loved ones were among his victims. Still, the case refused to go quiet. New survivors emerged in the years that followed. Women who had buried the memories deep. Others who came forward after watching news segments. But none could provide information that led to concrete discoveries. Forensic teams returned to Elephant Butte more than once, this time with better equipment and more advanced sonar, but still, no bodies surfaced. Ray's trailer was dismantled. His videos and journals were locked away. His name became synonymous with a kind of evil that didn't scream, it whispered. Because he wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows. He was your neighbor. And somewhere out there, the desert was still keeping his secrets. The death of David Parker Ray in 2002 should have marked the end of a nightmare. Instead, it left a void filled with unanswered questions, shattered families, and evidence that pointed toward horrors far deeper than what was already known. With his final breath, Ray ensured that justice would only be partial. Closure? Out of reach. The state had been robbed of its day in court. Victims were robbed of a full reckoning. And the families of dozens of missing women were left staring at a trail that abruptly ended at the grave of a man who never revealed the whole truth. But law enforcement wasn't done. Investigators reopened cold cases dating back to the 1980s, many of them previously dismissed or forgotten. The profiles were strikingly similar: young women, often transient, vanishing without a trace. Their cases hadn't made national news, because most weren't considered high risk enough. But in light of Ray's confessions and the journal entries found in his trailer, they were suddenly seen in a new, sinister context. One of those cases was Jill Troyer, a 22-year-old who disappeared in 1995. She'd been staying in Truth or Consequences and was last seen with Jesse Ray. Her name appeared in one of David's logs, beside an entry that simply read, "Training complete." Jill's body was never found. Another name scribbled into his journal matched that of Melinda Montoya, a hitchhiker whose body was discovered in a shallow grave outside Truth or Consequences, but too degraded for a precise time of death. At the time, her cause of death had been listed as undetermined. Now, it was reclassified as homicide. But here's the most disturbing part: forensics couldn't conclusively tie Ray to either murder. DNA was scarce. Decomposition erased trace evidence. And in many instances, the remains were never recovered at all. The only real leads came from Ray's own writings, and those were cryptic, fragmented, like puzzles missing too many pieces. With the courts unable to try him posthumously, the investigation pivoted toward his known associates. His daughter, Jessie Ray, had already served time for her role in the abduction of Kelly Garrett. But investigators suspected she may have been involved in more. Still, the statute of limitations and lack of physical evidence made additional charges impossible. Then there was Dennis Yancey, a man who initially denied any involvement, until the weight of the investigation broke him. In 2000, Yancey confessed to killing a woman named Marie Parker, the same woman Cindy Hendy had mentioned. According to Yancey, Ray forced him to strangle her while he filmed the entire ordeal. Yancey was sentenced, served time, and was later released on parole, only to be rearrested after violating its terms. Hendy, meanwhile, took her 36-year sentence and vanished into the prison system. But not before reminding investigators of something truly chilling: there were more tapes. She had seen some. Others were missing. She claimed Ray had destroyed many of them, burned the evidence when he thought police might get close. And yet, she also hinted some might still be hidden, buried near his former properties, locked in old lockers, or sealed in places no one had thought to look. Despite exhaustive efforts, the remaining tapes were never found. Still, what had been recovered was enough to make even seasoned detectives recoil. Over 100 video cassettes. Dozens of women. Many clearly unconscious, some awake but unresponsive. All of them subjected to humiliations and tortures that defied understanding. Only a handful were ever identified. The rest, Jane does with no voice, no history, no future. In one recording, a woman pleads for her life through a cracked voice, telling Ray her name and the city she's from, only for the tape to abruptly cut off before her fate is revealed. That name never matched any open case. Another shows a woman with what appears to be a fresh wound on her back, restrained to the gynecological chair Ray favored. Her face is swollen. Her breath shallow. The timestamp read 1993. But the physical trail was cold. The desert had swallowed its secrets. The FBI continued probing known burial sites across New Mexico. Cadaver dogs were deployed again. A forensic anthropologist led a renewed excavation near Monticello Canyon, where Ray was said to have taken long drives in the 90s. Once more, nothing. Even the lake, which had long been suspected as a dumping ground, gave up no bodies. Dredging operations were eventually called off. Too expensive. Too dangerous. Too uncertain. The case, unofficially, was filed among the unsolved. And yet the shadow of Ray never disappeared. Every now and then, a missing persons report would be reviewed, and someone would say, could this be one of his? But there was no clear way to know. With Ray gone, the physical evidence limited, and his journals intentionally vague, investigators could only speculate. The toy box itself was eventually dismantled. The trailer was deemed too grotesque to remain a permanent exhibit. The FBI kept certain elements, the chair, the whips, the surgical instruments, but much of it was destroyed. There was no interest in sensationalizing it. What remained, however, was the impact. Ray had exposed a brutal truth, that some serial predators don't seek fame or recognition. They don't want to be caught. They don't leave calling cards. They operate in the forgotten corners of society, prey on the unprotected, and build their horror in silence. He was methodical, patient, untraceable. And though he died without ever facing the full consequences of what he'd done, the legacy he left behind serves as a reminder of how evil can live right next door, laughing at barbecues, fixing fences, waving politely. David Parker Ray didn't need to hide in the shadows. He was the shadow. And somewhere out there, beneath the sand, in the currents of Elephant Butte Lake, or within sealed crates never opened, his remaining victims are still waiting to be found. Thank you for listening to Crime Echoes with Lewis. For more content like this, please like this video, and subscribe to my channel.